Welcome everyone, I'm Jack, and today we are diving into a topic that touches all of us at some point, dealing with fear and anxiety through the lens of faith. I'm excited to have with us Sarah, a spiritual counselor who has helped countless individuals find peace through their faith journey. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jack. I'm really looking forward to sharing insights on this crucial topic. You know, in today's world, anxiety and fear seem more prevalent than ever, but our spiritual resources for dealing with them are just as powerful as they've always been.
That's such an important perspective. Could you start by helping us understand the distinction between what you call godly peace and spiritual fear?
Of course, you know, one of my favorite scriptures comes from 2 Timothy 1:7, which tells us that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. This really sets the foundation for understanding that fear, especially debilitating fear, isn't part of God's plan for us.
That's powerful. How do you see this playing out in practical terms for people struggling with anxiety?
Well, let me share a real example. I worked with someone, let's call her Mary, who was dealing with severe anxiety. She knew all the right scriptures, attended church regularly, but still found herself paralyzed by fear. What really transformed her situation was understanding that faith isn't about the absence of fear, but about having a greater truth to hold on to.
That's fascinating. Could you tell us more about Mary's journey? What practical steps did she take?
Mary's breakthrough came through 3 key practices. First, she committed to persistent prayer, even when she didn't feel like it. She started with just 5 minutes each morning, following the example of Daniel, who prayed 3 times daily, despite his circumstances.
That's interesting. Starting small but being consistent. What were the other practices?
The second was joining a prayer support group. Actually, it was a WhatsApp prayer group, which made it very accessible. Having others pray with and for her reminded her she wasn't alone in her struggles. The third practice was what I call truth journaling, writing down her anxious thoughts and countering them with biblical truths.
I love how practical these approaches are. Can you explain more about this truth journaling concept?
Sure. When anxiety hits, our minds often spiral with what-if scenarios. Mary would write down her fears, then next to each one she'd write a relevant scripture or truth. For instance, if she wrote, "I'm afraid I can't handle this situation," she'd counter it with, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me."
That's really powerful. It's like building a personal arsenal of truth against fear. How long did it take before Mary started seeing changes?
You know, that's an important question because many people expect instant results. Mary's journey took about 3 months before she noticed significant changes. The key was that she kept at it even when it felt like nothing was happening.
That reminds me of what you mentioned earlier about persistent prayer. It seems like consistency is really crucial in this process.
Exactly, Jack. And this brings up another important point about spiritual growth. It's not just about the big moments of breakthrough, but the daily choice to trust God despite our feelings.
Speaking of community support, how important is it to have others involved in this journey?
Community is absolutely essential, Jack. When we're struggling with fear and anxiety, isolation can be our biggest enemy. In my experience, people who engage with supportive faith communities recover much faster than those who try to handle everything alone.
What would you say to someone who feels embarrassed about sharing their struggles with others in their faith community?
That's such a common concern. I always remind people that even the strongest biblical figures had moments of fear and doubt. Look at David. Many of his psalms are raw expressions of fear and anxiety, yet he's remembered as a man after God's own heart.
That's a wonderful perspective. It really takes the shame out of the equation.
Absolutely. And you know what's beautiful? When one person opens up about their struggles, it often gives others permission to do the same. I've seen entire prayer groups transformed because one person had the courage to be vulnerable.
That brings us to something I really want to explore, the role of prayer in anxiety management. Could you share some specific prayer strategies that have helped people?
One of the most effective approaches I've found is what I call anchor prayers. Short, powerful prayers you can return to throughout the day. Think of them as spiritual breathing exercises.
Could you give us an example of an anchor prayer?
Sure. A simple one might be, "Lord, you are my peace in this storm." The key is to choose something meaningful to you personally and rooted in Scripture. Some people prefer to use direct scripture verses, like "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want."
I can see how having these ready-to-use prayers could be especially helpful during anxiety spikes.
Exactly. And here's why they work so well. When anxiety hits, it's often hard to formulate coherent thoughts. Having these anchor prayers ready means you don't have to think about what to say, you just reach for what you've already prepared.
That's really practical advice. Now, I'm curious about something. How do you address the waiting period? You know, that time between when someone starts implementing these practices and when they start seeing results?
The waiting period is actually crucial for spiritual growth. I often use the analogy of an eagle rising above a storm. The eagle doesn't immediately escape the storm. It uses the storm's winds to rise higher. Similarly, our waiting periods, while challenging, can become opportunities for deeper faith development.
That's a beautiful analogy. How do you help people maintain hope during these waiting periods?
One effective approach is keeping a faith journal. I encourage people to document small victories and moments of peace, even if they're brief. When you're in the thick of anxiety, it's easy to forget how far you've come. This journal becomes evidence of God's faithfulness.
So it's like creating a personal testimony that you can refer back to?
Exactly. And speaking of testimonies, this reminds me of another powerful tool: sharing your journey with others. When you share your story, even while you're still in process, it not only encourages others, but also strengthens your own faith.
That's interesting because it shifts the focus from our own struggles to how our experience might help others.
Yes, and this shift in perspective is often therapeutic in itself. When we see our struggles as part of a bigger picture, perhaps as preparation for helping others, it gives our pain purpose.
You know, we've covered a lot of ground here. Could you summarize the key steps for our listeners who are starting this journey of overcoming fear and anxiety through faith?
Of course. First, establish a consistent prayer practice, even if it's just 5 minutes daily. Second, connect with a supportive faith community, whether in person or through groups like our WhatsApp prayer circles. Third, use tools like truth journaling and anchor prayers to build your spiritual resilience.
And what would you say is the most important thing to remember throughout this process?
Remember that this is a journey, not a quick fix. God's timing might be different from what we expect, but His promise of peace is real. As 2 Timothy 1:7 reminds us, we have been given power, love, and a sound mind. These are already ours. We just need to learn to walk in them.
Sarah, this has been incredibly insightful. Before we wrap up, is there a final word of encouragement you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes, I would. To everyone listening who's struggling with fear and anxiety right now, you are not alone, and you are not failing in your faith. Just as an eagle learns to soar by spreading its wings in the storm, your current challenges can become the very things that strengthen your faith and draw you closer to God.
Thank you, Sarah. Those words really resonate, and I believe they'll bring hope to many. The idea that our struggles can actually become stepping stones to stronger faith is powerful.
And remember, even if you can only take small steps right now, like those 5-minute prayers we discussed, each step matters. God sees your effort and honors your faith, no matter how small it might feel to you.
That's beautiful. And for our listeners who want to start implementing these practices, would you recommend starting with the anchor prayers we discussed earlier?
Yes, start with one simple anchor prayer that resonates with you. Write it down, carry it with you, and use it whenever anxiety strikes. Then gradually build your spiritual toolkit with journaling, community support, and regular prayer times.
This has been such a rich discussion, Sarah. Thank you for sharing these practical insights and spiritual wisdom with us today. To our listeners, remember that peace is not just a destination but a person, and through faith, we can access that peace even in the midst of our storms.
Thank you, Jack. It's been a joy to share these truths. I'm praying that everyone listening will experience God's peace in a new and powerful way.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you all for joining us on this important conversation about overcoming fear and anxiety through faith. Until next time, remember, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind.